Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
A young shop assistant was very surprised when she inherited a chair from a beggar. And as soon as the girl touched it, "Rufina, is this enough money?" the old woman asked the shop assistant, extending her trembling hand filled with coins. The girl quickly counted the money and, tossing it into the cash register, nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Tiara, that's enough." Satisfied, the elderly woman collected her purchases from the counter: a poppy seed bun, processed cheese, a carton of yogurt, about 200 grams of caramel candies, and shuffled toward the exit. Despite her advanced age, Tiara lived alone and managed her household herself. Every day, she came to the store where Rufina worked, purchasing the same basic set of items, scooping out all the coins from her pocket. Rufina would toss the money into the register and watch the old woman walk to the door, later adding the missing amount from her own wallet. "Aren't you tired of paying for her?" Rufina's coworker once asked. "Or do you have money to spare?" "I don't have money to spare," Rufina replied. "But I won't go broke helping an old lady." "What a fool! She comes here on purpose. She knows you're soft-hearted and takes advantage of it." Rufina just shrugged and stayed silent. She had always pitied the destitute and the suffering. She'd bring home an injured pigeon and nurse it back to health, or take in a stray kitten. Once, on her way to the store, she encountered a beggar and gave her all the money she had. "Why did you do that?" "Don't you understand we now have no money for bread for lunch?" her mother scolded her. "We still have soup and potatoes," the girl replied. "But she might starve to death." Her mother could only throw up her hands. On the one hand, she was glad her daughter was growing up to be a kind and compassionate person. On the other hand, she knew that others would take advantage of her generosity. After finishing school, Rufina left her village for the city. Despite her mother's attempts to persuade her to stay, the girl stood firm. "What are you going to do there?" her mother asked. "We have plenty of suitors and jobs here. What more do you need for a good life? Are suitors really the most important thing?" Rufina would reply. "I want to see the world and show myself. If I don't like it, I'll come back home." Seeing her daughter's determination, Eldora relented. She saw her off at the bus, crossed herself, and began waiting for her return. "Why are you so worried?" Eldora asked her neighbor. "Look at how many young people have left our village. And rightly so. What's the point of them staying here, young and beautiful? And who needs them in the city?" Eldora insisted. "Or do you think the city doesn't have its share of young and beautiful people? Think back to your own youth," the neighbor countered. "Didn't you dream of a better life at her age?" "I didn't have time for dreams," Eldora snapped. "As soon as I finished school, I married Manuelo, and that was the end of any dreams. His mother immediately got me involved in running the household. While her dear son was off downing drinks with his friends after work, I was working myself to the bone in their house." "Then why didn't you leave him? Your family life weighed on you so much." "It wasn't the life that weighed on me, it was the drunkard husband and the blood-sucking mother-in-law. And I didn't leave because I had nowhere to go. I got married against my parents' wishes. I loved him, even though he was already drinking back then. At the wedding, my father said, 'You've made your choice, now live with it. There's no turning back.' So I endured. And then Rufina was born. My mother-in-law seemed to soften a bit and started helping. But Manuelo wasn't happy about having a daughter, he wanted a son. He started drinking even more, disappearing at night. The baby's cries annoyed him. And then he vanished altogether." "Well, you know the rest," Eldora concluded. "Yes, a sad story," the neighbor agreed. "Drinking never leads to anything good. They never found who was responsible for his death, did they? Died like a dog under a fence." "And his mother followed soon after," Eldora added with a sigh. "Maybe it's for the best. Look how Rufina turned out, smart and beautiful." "Yes, she's everything I have," her mother agreed. "If only she could find herself a good husband. Why does she care so much about that city?" Eldora lamented again. Don't worry so much, the neighbor reassured her. Your daughter will be fine. She's striking, kind, and always smiling. She's bound to meet a decent man. God willing. Meanwhile, Rufina had no intention of getting married. She wanted to establish herself in the city, stand on her own 2 feet, and be independent. Knowing her mother's tragic story, she was determined to avoid the same fate. Rufina enrolled in a trade school and secured a spot in a dormitory. By her 2nd year, she got a job as a shop assistant in a grocery store. After graduation, she stayed at the same store, where the owner respected her for her honesty, kindness, and ability to avoid conflicts. The owner kindly offered her a small but cozy room in her house for a symbolic rent. Rufina worked from morning till evening every day, dreaming of saving enough money for her own place. But over time, she realized this goal was almost impossible for her to achieve. Such a dreamer, her coworker teased. Instead of spending your life at work, you should find yourself a rich husband. So he can remind me every day how he pays for everything? That's no big deal. Letitia retorted. I don't want that, Rufina sighed. Humph, Letitia smirked and shrugged. At just over 30, Letitia had a wealth of romantic experience, changing men as easily as changing gloves. Her tall stature, striking figure, and bold makeup caught the attention of everyone around, and her ability to flirt left no male customer unmoved. But her whirlwind romances always fizzled out as quickly as they began. After each breakup, Letitia would shrug and say, "Not the one." One morning, Rufina was on her way to work when her attention was drawn to 2 police officers escorting a beggar. "You can explain everything at the station," one officer said sternly. "But I didn't do anything wrong," the woman protested, shuffling alongside the officers. The woman's voice seemed familiar to Rufina. Looking closer, she recognized her regular customer. "Mrs. Tiara." Rufina called out. "Is that you?" In the scruffy, ragged woman with disheveled hair, it was hard to recognize the usually tidy and pleasant customer of the store. When Tiara saw Rufina, she blushed deeply and lowered her gaze in embarrassment. "Do you know her?" one of the police officers asked. "Yes," Rufina replied. "I mean, she's a regular customer of mine." "A customer?" the second officer laughed. "And what exactly does she buy from you?" The detained woman remained silent, staring at the ground. "Mrs. Tiara," Rufina addressed her, "why are you dressed like this? What happened to you?" "Oh, Tiara," the officer mocked with a grin. "Well, let's continue to the car." "Wait." Rufina stopped them. "What did she do?" "Lady, don't interfere with our work." "We'll issue her a fine and let her go," said the same grinning officer, brushing her off. "Let me pay the fine," Rufina pleaded. The officers exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" asked the more serious one. Rufina nodded and reached into her bag for her wallet. "Well, lucky you," the officer said to the detained woman. "Next time I see you here, it won't be this easy." After bailing out the old woman, Rufina took her by the hand and led her away. The 2 women walked in silence for a few minutes until Tiara broke it. "Thank you, Rufina," she said, still avoiding eye contact. "It's nothing," Rufina replied, sitting down on a bench near the store and guiding her acquaintance to sit beside her. Glancing at her watch and seeing she still had time, Rufina asked, "So, what happened to you? Why are you in this state?" The old woman hesitated, then pulled some coins out of her pocket. Showing them to Rufina, she said, "Here. Some kind people gave it to me." "Are you begging for alms?" Rufina asked in surprise. "Don't you have enough from your pension?" "It's enough," Tiara admitted. "But I don't spend it on food." "Then what do you spend it on?" Rufina asked, still baffled by the older woman's motives for begging. Tiara shrugged but remained silent, unwilling to explain. Rufina glanced at her watch and said, "Come with me. I need to open the store." The elderly woman obediently shuffled after her rescuer. At the store, Rufina offered Tiara some leftover pastries from the previous day. She also packed a bag of groceries and handed it to her. "Here. Take this, it's a gift." "No. No." Tiara protested, shaking her head. "Please, take it." Rufina insisted. Tiara finally accepted the bag and said, "Thank you, Rufina. You're so kind. May God bless you with happiness." After seeing her visitor off, Rufina soon forgot about the strange incident. But a few days later, Letitia brought up Tiara. "Your beggar hasn't been around for a while," she remarked. "Who?" Rufina asked, confused. "Odd, isn't it?" Letitia continued, ignoring the question. "Maybe she died?" "Don't say such things. She's not a beggar at all." "Oh, really? What, does she get her pension in small coins?" Letitia retorted mockingly. Rufina didn't argue with Letitia, though she also found Tiara's absence strange. There had been no sign of her for several days. "Maybe she's sick?" Rufina speculated. "Then why don't you go check on her?" Letitia teased. "I would if I knew her address," Rufina replied. "What a saint." Letitia couldn't resist commenting. "She's not coming around? Great. You'll save more money." Rufina, used to Letitia's remarks, remained silent. However, that evening, on her way home from work, she spotted Tiara by chance. This time, the elderly woman was neatly dressed, her hair was tidied, and she seemed genuinely happy. The transformation delighted Rufina, but it also puzzled her. Despite the familiar features, it felt like she was looking at an entirely different person. Tiara didn't notice her, she seemed lost in her thoughts. She was following a young man carrying an old, worn chair. "Mrs. Tiara!" Rufina called out. The elderly woman stopped and turned toward the voice. When she saw Rufina, her face lit up with a wide smile. "Rufina! How are you?" she asked warmly. At that moment, the man reached a 3-story building along the road. He set the chair down near the entrance of the last staircase and said, "Well, from here, you're on your own." "Thank you, kind man." Tiara responded gratefully and made her way to the chair. Rufina followed her. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I was starting to worry about you." "I'm fine," Tiara replied, trying to lift the chair. "Let me help you," Rufina offered, taking the chair from the older woman's hands. "Do you live here?" "Yes, see my windows up there." Tiara pointed to the top floor. When they entered Tiara's apartment, Rufina noticed that while the furnishings were simple and the renovations old, the space was clean and cozy. Once the chair was placed in its spot, the delighted hostess offered Rufina some coffee. But knowing Tiara's financial situation, Rufina politely declined, claiming she suddenly remembered an urgent task. "Well, another time then," the elderly woman said, her gaze fixed lovingly on the chair. On her first day off in a long time, Rufina decided to sleep in. But not used to lounging in bed for too long, she was already having breakfast by 8. The store manager, who was also the landlord, seemed to be in an unusually good mood that morning. Typically, she left the house later, but today she had risen at the crack of dawn and disappeared to an unknown destination, promising to return soon. "What should I do with my time?" Rufina wondered, sitting at the table. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching engine caught her attention. Outside the window, an unfamiliar car pulled up at the gate. A young man stepped out and headed toward the house. Before Rufina could process what was happening, the man was already standing in the entryway, staring at her intently. "Who are you?" he asked. "And who are you?" Rufina retorted. The young man nonchalantly removed his jacket, hung it in the closet, took off his shoes, and walked into the kitchen where Rufina was seated. Extending his hand, he introduced himself. "Roberto." "Oh, you must be Florencia's son," Rufina guessed. Only then did she notice the resemblance between the man and her landlord. The tall, dark-haired, brown-eyed man with a piercing gaze and a radiant smile nodded, confirming her assumption. He repeated his question. "And you are?" Realizing she hadn't introduced herself yet, Rufina quickly stood up, awkwardly wiped her hand on her apron, and extended it toward her new acquaintance. "Rufina. And what are you doing here?" Roberto asked. "I live here," she explained. "Florencia rents me a room." "Rents a room?" Roberto said in surprise. "Since when did she start renting out rooms? Is she short on money?" No, Rufina assured him. "Your mother kindly offered me a place to stay when I needed it." "Ah, that sounds like my mom. A kind soul." "Florencia didn't tell me you were coming," Rufina said. "I guess she didn't tell you about me either." "Quite the opposite," Roberto replied. "She talked my ear off about you, but she conveniently left out the part where you're living in our house." Hearing Roberto's admission, Rufina blushed deeply. Florencia often talked about her son, but Rufina had never imagined that she also spoke to him about her. Trying to hide her embarrassment, Rufina asked, "You must be tired from the road. Can I get you some coffee?" Rufina took charge, fetching utensils, pouring coffee, slicing sandwiches, and sliding a plate toward Roberto. "Help yourself," she offered. Not long after, Florencia returned. Seeing her son and tenant chatting over coffee, she remarked with satisfaction, "I see you've already met." Roberto hugged his mother and said, referring to Rufina, "You never cease to surprise me." Rufina had nowhere to stay, and I didn't want to lose a valuable employee, Florencia explained. "So, I invited her to live here." "I see. Well, I have a surprise for you too," Roberto teased, "but I'll tell you later." Knowing that mother and son hadn't seen each other in almost 3 years, Rufina decided to give them privacy. Gathering her things, she left the house, hearing Florencia call after her. "Don't stay out too late. We'll celebrate Roberto's arrival this evening." For several hours, Rufina wandered aimlessly through the streets. Despite it being late October, the weather was warm and sunny. After walking her fill, Rufina stopped by the store. Letitia, not expecting her to show up, asked in surprise, "Can't sit still at home on your day off? Or are you already missing work?" "Not really. Florencia's son arrived, so I thought I'd give them some space to talk privately," Rufina explained. Letitia's face lit up with excitement. She didn't even try to hide her enthusiasm. "Roberto's here? When? Alone? For long? What did he say?" She bombarded Rufina with questions. "Yes, alone," Rufina replied, puzzled by Letitia's reaction. "He arrived this morning." "For how long?" "I don't know." "Why are you so worked up?" "Is he handsome?" Letitia asked, ignoring Rufina's surprise. "You're so lucky to live in their house. If I were you, I wouldn't waste any time. Marry a man like him, and all your problems will be solved." "What are you even talking about?" "He's probably 30. "Not 30, he's 28, Letitia corrected her. "That's the perfect age for a man, old enough to have settled down but still looking to start a family." "How do you know?" "I know a lot," Letitia replied smugly. "Roberto would have been mine ages ago if his mother hadn't interfered." "You two dated?" Rufina clarified. "No, but we were close to it. The last time he was here, he stopped by the shop every day and kept giving me looks. But Florencia didn't like it. She did everything she could to keep us apart. Then he left for an internship abroad. And just like that, our love story ended before it even began." Changing the subject abruptly, Letitia added, "By the way, that old lady of yours stopped by. She was asking for you." "What did she want?" "Did she say?" "No, but I bet it was for free food, as usual," Letitia replied with a shrug. "She said she'd come back tomorrow." Rufina decided not to mention that she had visited Tiara the day before. She said her goodbyes to Letitia and headed home, mentally replaying the events of the past 2 days. Rufina came Florencia's enthusiastic call from the kitchen as soon as she walked in. Perfect timing. Come in. Peeking into the kitchen, Rufina saw Florencia finishing the last touches for a festive dinner. Sit next to Roberto. He'll be here any minute, Florencia said as she set the table. Rufina felt awkward about the attention from her employer, but she didn't dare protest. Florencia, noticing her tenant's unease, reassured her warmly. Don't be shy. Make yourself at home. After all this time, you're like family to me. Besides, Roberto seems to like you. Who knows? Maybe we'll end up as in-laws. The doorbell rang. Speak of the devil, Florencia exclaimed, rushing out of the kitchen. Nervously, Rufina adjusted a stray lock of hair and smoothed her dress. Florencia's revelation had stirred her thoughts. Roberto had caught her attention from the very first moment, but she hadn't dared to even consider the idea of marrying him. Firstly, he was 8 years older than her. Secondly, his education and status were far above hers. And thirdly, he was the son of her employer. The family's wealth also worked against Roberto in her eyes. Having learned from her mother's life story, Rufina was looking for someone equal to her. She didn't want to feel like a poor relative next to her husband. Lost in her thoughts, she lost track of time. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she realized that Florencia and her son had been gone for at least 10 minutes. Listening carefully, she could hear voices coming from the hallway. You should have warned me, but I wanted to surprise you, Roberto was saying. The surprise worked, Florencia responded, sounding disappointed. Come in. Come in? Rufina's mind raced. He's not alone? With who? A fiancé? A wife? A friend? A girl entered the dining room. She looked about 25 to 27, tall and athletic. With a beautiful figure, long black hair as dark as coal, and large green eyes framed with artificial lashes, everything about her screamed that she paid a lot of attention to her appearance. Her confident behavior also suggested she was eager to fit in with the group quickly. Denisa, the newcomer, introduced herself to the seated guests. Rufina, replied the girl. Rufina, come sit with me. Florencia invited her tenant, adding another place setting at the table. During dinner, Rufina learned that Roberto and Denisa had studied at the same university, though in different departments. After graduating, they both interned abroad, and it was during that time that they grew close, feeling the lack of communication with fellow countrymen. We've been living together for over a year now, Denisa shared. And we're planning to get married in the near future. And where do you plan to live? Florencia asked. Oh, there won't be any problems with that, the guest exhaled. I have an apartment. But for the wedding, my father promised to give me a house in the suburbs of the capital. A house is good, the hostess said thoughtfully. But why in the suburbs of the capital? Well, we can't go back to some remote place, the bride waved her hands. There are more prospects in the capital. Roberto plans to keep climbing the career ladder, and my dad will help him with that. And what about you? Florencia asked. Are you going to build a career as well? Denisa laughed. Are you kidding me? Why should a girl like me waste herself on boring business negotiations and endless office work? I prefer to live for my own pleasure. I have everything for that: home, money, friends. All that's left is to marry well. She glanced at Roberto and smiled. Roberto is a great candidate. A great candidate, the mother repeated the guest's words, as if echoing them. Yes. He's smart, reliable. He's exactly what I need. And you? Are you sure you're a good match for my son? Florencia, taken aback by the guest's boldness, asked, leaving Denisa a bit confused. What's wrong with me? Denisa quickly recovered and clarified. I'm beautiful, educated, rich, with good genetics. Well, I'll grant that wealth and genetics aren't your accomplishments, the woman countered. And outer beauty fades quickly if there's nothing inside to support it. Are you saying I'm not worthy of your son? I didn't say that, Florencia answered. After all, it's Roberto's choice. But I think you shouldn't rush into marriage. Live together first. Then we'll see. I'm not going to stay single until I'm 30, waiting for my dear to finally propose. My dad said. Who's your dad? The hostess interrupted her. My dad is the rector of the university. He sent Roberto abroad for his internship. Do you know how many people wanted to take his place? They even offered him money, but my dad chose Roberto. So, it was your father who chose your future son-in-law? Florencia speculated. No, I chose him, Denisa corrected her. And my dad helped advance my boyfriend's career. My husband can't be just a simple clerk. I see, said Florencia, casting a brief glance at Rufina, who had been silent all this time, and added, let's have some coffee. Thank you for dinner. But I think I'll go now, Rufina said, getting up from the table. Florencia also wanted the dinner to end quickly, but Roberto's fiancé, seemingly unaware of her discomfort, kept talking about herself, the wedding, and her life plans. In her speech, it was all about I. Don't be upset. Denisa finally noticed Florencia's distant look and tried to comfort her. Roberto is lucky to have me. My father has many connections. He will help him advance. We'll both get what we want, Roberto, a career, and I, a beautiful life. Well, yes, Florencia answered, flustered, and looked at her son. Catching his mother's gaze and sensing her mood, Roberto stood up from the table and said, I think we'll go. It's late already. I still need to take Denisa home. Don't wait for me. Go to bed, we'll talk tomorrow. Mom? Why aren't you asleep? It's already late. Roberto was surprised when he returned home after midnight and found his mother sitting on the couch in the living room. I was waiting for you, Florencia calmly replied. I wanted to look into your eyes and understand what happened to you. What do you mean? Roberto asked, puzzled. Tell me, do you love Denisa so much that you're willing to put up with her humiliation? Or is there another reason? Roberto sat down on the couch next to his mother. Gathering his thoughts, he began to speak. You've achieved everything on your own in this life, and you taught me the same. I was the best in my department. But when it came to the internship, it turned out there were only 2 positions. No one doubted that one spot would go to the rector's daughter, even though she didn't need it. And you decided to start a relationship with her to get the second spot, his mother guessed. Yes, Roberto confessed. The internship abroad was my chance, and I didn't want to miss it. They offered me a great position at a subsidiary in the capital. I got what I was aiming for. I'm happy for you, son. But you can't break your life just for a career. Denisa is not the right person for you. Once, you told me the same thing about Leticia, Roberto reminded her. You advised me to find a girl who's equal to me. Yes, his mother agreed. I meant someone equal in intellect, someone who will appreciate you, respect you, and love you. Leticia, just like your Denisa, is empty. All they care about is money. Beneath their beautiful exterior, there's nothing inside. Despite all the wealth her father has, Denisa is poor. She's a spoiled, ill-mannered egoist, convinced that the world revolves around her. And I'm sorry that you're willing to put up with her disrespect just for the sake of your career. I didn't raise you to be like this, son. Roberto sat with his head lowered. He was ashamed of his girlfriend and of himself. He realized that he and Denisa were different, but in his dreams of a career, he had stopped noticing the basics. You're an adult now, his mother continued. I have no right to tell you how to live or who to be with. That should be your choice. But I don't want to watch my son turn into a doormat for a woman. After a long pause, Florencia got up from the couch and headed to her room, saying, I think I'll go. I need to get up early tomorrow. Rufina was, as usual, behind the counter, serving another customer when Mrs. Tiara walked into the store. In her worn-out coat, knitted beret, and old boots, she looked like a beggar, but her angelic smile and gentle gaze were warm and inviting. As usual, the woman picked a poppy seed roll, a pack of yogurt, and a kilogram of pasta. This time, she handed Rufina a bill and asked, "Is this enough?" Surprised, the girl placed the money in the register, then, after getting the change, handed it back to the elderly lady. "No, Rufina, keep the change. You're always helping me out," Mrs. Tiara said with a smile. The saleswoman put the change back into the register and asked, "Mrs. Tiara, is everything okay? You haven't been around here for a while." "Thank you, dear," the old lady smiled. "Everything is fine. I just had some business to take care of." Business? What kind of business could she have? Rufina thought to herself, but didn't dare ask out loud. Watching the regular customer leave, she said to her colleague, "Did I imagine it, or did the old lady seem to have something on her mind?" "Don't worry about it," Letitia replied. "At her age, people can start losing their minds. She's probably no exception." "What business could she have?" Rufina asked, ignoring Letitia's sarcastic comment. "And where did she get that money from?" "What business could she have?" Letitia repeated. "She probably begs for money on the street. Today, someone must have given her a nice donation. Now she's come to show off." "You're so mean, Letitia," Rufina snapped. "Well, that's nothing like you, soft-hearted. You'll stay empty-handed with your pity," Letitia shot back. "When you're old, you'll be just like her, begging for money. Better with an outstretched hand than with a stone in my chest and under my shirt," Rufina retorted. Letitia was about to say something else, but a new customer entered the store. Soon, the girls forgot about their argument. Later that evening, another surprise awaited Rufina. As she stepped inside the house, she heard shouting. It was the voice of the guest from the previous day. Denisa was arguing with her fiancé and his mother. "My father won't leave a single trace of your son. Do you know how many connections he has? Roberto only got that job thanks to my dad's connections. Without him, he wouldn't have gotten that position. I'll make sure he's never hired by any decent company. And you." The girl gasped from the fury. "You'll regret turning him against me. He'll never find anyone like me again." At that moment, Rufina appeared in the living room, drawing the attention of everyone present. Denisa found a new reason to continue the argument. "Aha! I understand. It's you who got involved," she snapped at the newly arrived tenant. "You were quick to catch him. But what's surprising about that? Girls like you are just looking for a rich man. You get married, have kids, and live a carefree life. But you're mistaken. Why would he want a poor thing like you? He'll use you and throw you away." "That's enough." Roberto interrupted her. "You've said enough. We've heard you. Now leave. I'm ashamed that I got involved with you. As for my career," he sighed deeply, "you're completely wrong. I'll prove to you and everyone else that your father has nothing to do with this. We'll see about that," Denisa said with a threatening tone, pulling her cloak around her. With those words, she rushed out of the house, brushing past Rufina. Slamming the door behind her, she stormed down the path and disappeared beyond the gate. A heavy silence hung in the living room for a few moments. No one dared to break it. Roberto was the first to speak. "Sorry for that scene. I'm sorry you had to witness the disgraceful behavior of my ex-girlfriend." "I'm glad you came to your senses," his mother replied. "I think I'll go," Rufina said and headed for her room. She understood that Denise's words were said in anger, but there was an important point in them. Roberto would never see her as an equal, which meant she had no chance of catching his attention. Rufina liked Roberto, but she didn't even dare to dream of him, dismissing all his gestures as coincidences or playful actions on his part. However, seeing Rufina every day, the young man felt himself becoming more and more drawn to her. He liked everything about the tenant, her calm and agreeable nature, impeccable behavior, tact, and politeness in communication. But what attracted him the most was her innocence and honesty. Her kindness had no boundaries, and it was evident to everyone. Noticing her son's growing interest in the tenant, Florencia once asked, "Is this serious, or are you just looking for some fun?" "I don't know," he replied honestly. "Rufina is a worthy girl, but I'm not sure if she's the one. I think she would make a great wife." His mother shared her thoughts. "You're surprising me," he confessed. "I once got infatuated with your shopkeeper, and you were totally against it. What's changed?" "I wasn't against the shopkeeper," Florencia corrected him. "I was against Letitia. And you know why? She wasn't interested in you, but in your status, wealth, and prospects. She didn't see you as a man or a person, she saw you as a chance to climb a few steps higher. Nothing more." "And what about Rufina?" "Rufina is cut from a different cloth. Sometimes I look at her and wonder, can there really still be such pure and noble people in our time?" The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a phone call. "It's from the capital," Roberto told his mother and answered the call. Florencia watched her son carefully, noticing that with each passing second, he was becoming more and more somber. After listening to the caller, he hung up the phone. "What happened?" his mother asked. "Was it from your new job?" "Yes. But they changed their mind about hiring me." "Why?" the woman asked, surprised, then immediately remembered Denisa's threats. "Ah, I see. Your ex tried to do something with her daddy's help?" "I think so. But maybe it's for the best. It's not the right time to leave now. I'll look for work here for a while. I can always leave later." Florenica, feeling down, suddenly became more cheerful. "You know, I was planning to expand," she said. "Maybe you can help me with that. I know it's not really your thing, but you need a job, and I need a reliable assistant. I'm sure Denisa will calm down soon and forget about you. Then you can return to what you were doing." Roberto, without much thought, agreed to his mother's offer, and together they went to the shop. When Letitia saw him, she started fidgeting. She still hadn't given up hope of catching the shopkeeper's son in her net. Unlike her colleague, Rufina blushed upon hearing that Roberto would be helping his mother for a while. Now, they would have to see each other not only at home but also at work. Rufina struggled to keep her feelings for him under control. "I hope Roberto's presence won't interfere with the work?" Florencia asked sternly, looking at the excited Letitia. "Don't worry," Letitia reassured her. "We'll work even better now." The shop owner shook her head and sighed. Knowing Letitia's nature, she had no doubt that the girl would do everything she could to win over her son. But after their conversation earlier that day, she was sure that her efforts would lead nowhere. Tiara entered the shop. She walked along the counter, not buying anything, and headed toward the exit. Rufina thought the woman seemed upset. Ignoring her boss, the girl quickly followed the elderly woman outside. A few minutes later, she returned, gathered some products in a bag, paid for them from her own wallet, and rushed out of the shop again. The owner watched through the window, confused by what was happening. Noticing the perplexed expression on her boss's face, Letitia spoke in her usual manner. "Look at her, poor thing. Why is she so attached to that old woman?" "Who is she?" Florencia asked, curious. "Does she know her?" "She's just a local beggar," Letitia explained. "She started coming to your shop. She always pays with small change that isn't enough, and this fool covers the difference at the cash register." Rufina returned to the shop and, as if nothing had happened, stood behind the counter. She had no intention of explaining herself to her boss. "After all, I haven't stolen anything," she thought. "I'm not obligated to account for my actions." But the questioning look on Florencia's face left her no choice. "She's a friend of mine," the girl explained. "She's all alone and has no one to help her. I feel sorry for her." And you buy food for her with your own money? The owner asked. Sometimes, when she doesn't have enough. Letitia smirked. Florencia, I guess you're paying her too much if she can afford to feed beggars, she remarked. Be quiet, Letitia, her boss retorted. After a moment of thought, she continued. But that's actually a good idea. We don't have to wait for products to reach their expiration date and throw them away. We could sell them at a reduced price. That way, the products won't go to waste and we'll attract more customers. Letitia wasn't pleased with her boss's idea. She didn't care much either way. Rufina, however, was excited. She liked Florencia's suggestion. She eagerly began looking for products nearing their expiration dates and placed them on a separate shelf. Meanwhile, Denisa continued plotting against Roberto, but he didn't respond to her attempts to ruin his life, which only infuriated his ex-fiancée even more. She remained silent for several weeks, waiting for him to come to his senses and return to her. However, her plan failed. Even the obstacles created by her father in Roberto's career didn't have the desired effect. Roberto was diligently helping his mother with her business, and a new store was about to open, which led Letitia to become more active. She desperately wanted to secure the position of manager, and for that, she needed to get closer to the owner's son. Are you not ashamed to cling to a man? Rufina asked one day when she and her colleague were alone. I'm not clinging, I'm going after what I want. Letitia corrected her. And you, with your principles, will stay single forever. With the opportunity you have, I would have gotten him into my bed a long time ago. Rufina didn't get a chance to respond as Roberto entered the store. Letitia immediately rushed to him with a smile. Roberto, I remember you love the theater. I have 2 tickets for the premiere. How about we go together? Sorry, but I've already bought tickets, and I'm going with someone else. That's too bad, Letitia said, looking disappointed. Guess I'll have to invite a friend. While Letitia was distracted by a customer, Roberto turned to Rufina. Do you like the theater? Rufina shrugged, feeling embarrassed to admit that she had never been to a theater before. Are you free tonight? Rufina nodded. Then I'll take you to a play. What about your company? She asked. The best company for me is you, he said, and his words made her blush. I'd love to go with you to the theater. That evening, Rufina sifted through her modest wardrobe and settled on a simple dress that suited her perfectly. With minimal makeup, her hair neatly styled into a shell shape, and low-heeled shoes, she looked feminine and very elegant. Roberto appreciated her new look, as she usually preferred pants and jeans to dresses and sneakers over heels. At the theater, Rufina couldn't hide her amazement at the luxurious interior. While she admired the decor, her companion was handing their coats to the wardrobe attendant. Suddenly, Letitia appeared out of nowhere beside him. I was sure I'd find you here, Letitia declared, linking her arm with Roberto's. Where are your friends? Maybe you could introduce me to them? I don't think that's appropriate here, he replied. Sorry, but I have to go. Roberto was already about to leave the pushy Letitia when Denisa appeared before them. So this is who you replaced me with, she asked, giving Rufina a judgmental look. Without waiting for a response, she grabbed Rufina's hair and spat out, Didn't your mother teach you that taking someone else's is wrong? Letitia screamed in surprise and pain. Roberto grabbed his former fiancée by the wrist, trying to free Rufina's hair, but Denisa wasn't about to let go of her rival. Next time I see you with him, you won't get off so easy, Denisa hissed, ignoring the crowd of onlookers starting to gather. Got it? Twisting from the pain, Letitia barely managed to nod. Denisa released her and, acting as if nothing had happened, said, Sorry, I lost my temper. Letitia rushed out of the theater in a hurry. She felt humiliated and ashamed. Once she had caught her breath and calmed down, she thought to herself in surprise, How did I mess up so badly? Some slut just embarrassed me in front of an intelligent audience, and I froze and didn't say a word. And Roberto stood there like a statue. He couldn't even defend me. Why do I need a guy like him? Let them figure it out on their own. Meanwhile, noticing the commotion caused by Denisa, her father approached her. He gave Roberto a displeased glance, then took his daughter by the hand and pulled her aside. You can have your little disputes wherever you like, but not in front of the public who knows and respects me, he hissed in her ear. Denisa sighed and followed her father. Roberto returned to Rufina, who was standing off to the side, worried that one of the girls might see her. Let's leave, she suggested. My mood is ruined. Sorry. I didn't expect to see Denisa here. I understand. But still, let's leave here. Roberto and Rufina left the theater and headed toward the bus stop. As usual, a few taxis were parked around the corner. It was cold outside that evening, but there was no wind. How about we take a walk? Rufina suddenly suggested. With pleasure, Roberto replied, extending his arm to her. For a few minutes, they walked in silence. Roberto felt awkward with his companion for ruining the evening, while Rufina replayed the incident in the theater in her mind and caught herself thinking that, in Letitia's place, it could have been her. Gradually, her fear turned into spontaneous laughter. Seeing Rufina laugh, Roberto joined in. The awkwardness between them disappeared. Suddenly, the girl shivered from the cold. How about we go into a cafe and have some hot coffee, the man suggested. Sure. Rufina agreed. Soon, they had completely forgotten about the unpleasant incident at the theater. Over a cup of hot coffee and a heartfelt conversation, time passed unnoticed. Before they left the cafe, as Roberto helped her put on her coat, he finally allowed himself to do what he had been dreaming of for a long time. He gently touched his lips to Rufina's and quickly pulled away, whispering, "Sorry. I couldn't help myself." Rufina's face immediately turned crimson, but a voice inside her screamed, "Do what you want." She stood on tiptoe and kissed Roberto herself. It was their first kiss, awkward, but so desired and unforgettable. The next morning, Rufina woke up earlier than usual. Her lips still remembered the kiss with Roberto, and her pulse quickened just by thinking about it. Rufina was afraid that the hostess's son might regret what had happened the day before, so she tried to avoid him. After hastily drinking a cup of coffee, she quietly slipped out of the house. To her surprise, Letitia was already in charge of the shop. She seemed to be in a bad mood but, after a brief hesitation, decided to tell her coworker about the incident at the theater. "Can you believe how badly I embarrassed myself?" she raged. "I got it all for nothing. Now the whole town is gossiping about the scandal." "People will talk and forget," Rufina reassured her. "And you should forget too." Soon, Roberto arrived at work. Seeing Letitia's displeased face, he immediately began to apologize to her. The moment Letitia heard his apology, she shifted from anger to charm. Flashing him a wide smile, she said, "I'll accept your apology if you invite me on a date." "I'm sorry, but that's not possible," he replied firmly. "All my dates now are with one girl, and it's not you." Rufina felt a flush rise to her face. To avoid giving away her emotions, she started sorting through the products, looking for items close to their expiration date. Not wanting to continue the conversation with Letitia, Roberto disappeared into his mother's office. After receiving another rejection, the saleswoman furrowed her brows. It was clear that, confident in her own attractiveness, she hadn't expected such a turn of events. "I didn't really care anyway," she muttered to herself, scowling and falling silent. However, the pause didn't last long. Overcome with curiosity and anger, Letitia turned to her coworker. "Do you happen to know who he's seeing this time?" Rufina didn't say a word, merely shrugged and immersed herself in her work. Just then, Tiara entered the shop. Normally, she came later, so the girls didn't immediately notice her among the other customers. Moreover, the old woman was wearing different clothes, not new, but quite respectable, without patches or holes. Her boots were also different, clearly worn but still sturdier than the previous pair. In her new outfit, the woman seemed to feel younger. "Mrs. Tiara?" Rufina was surprised by her transformation. "You look wonderful." "Thank you, dear," the old woman replied, smiling widely. "You're wearing a new outfit today?" Tiara was pleased by the compliment from the young woman. She was even more delighted that Rufina had noticed the changes in her. But, unaccustomed to such attention, she began to explain herself. "Oh, it's from a neighbor. She gave me clothes from her mother, who recently passed away. She doesn't need them anymore, and I remember Aureliana kindly when I wear her clothes. This coat looks great on you." Rufina praised her again. The old woman smiled and started picking out items from the discounted section. This time, she selected chicken thighs, a dozen eggs, a small package of mayonnaise, and a few other things. Rufina couldn't hide her surprise at the regular customers' choices. Noticing the puzzled look from the saleswoman, Tiara explained, "Today's my birthday. It might be the last one in my life. I just want to feel like it's a celebration." "Congratulations." Rufina brightened up. "Are guests coming?" Just moments ago, the cheerful old woman drooped, sighing as she replied, "What guests? In recent years, only Aureliana used to visit me. But now she's gone, too. No, I'll be going to visit them soon enough. But today, I want to feel like the birthday girl." She stood silently for a few seconds, staring at the pastries from yesterday, then picked one up and walked to the register. Noticing the unusually large amount of items in Tiara's basket, Letitia asked in a displeased tone, "Do you have enough money for such a feast?" Rufina, realizing what was happening, quickly ran to the register and said, "I'll take care of it." But Tiara pulled out a few new bills from her pocket and handed them to Letitia. "That's enough," she said, placing the items in a bag. With astonished looks from the salespeople and customers, the old woman left the store. Despite the hand-me-down clothes and almost expired products in her bag, at that moment, she seemed truly happy. After her shift, Letitia rushed home, not wanting to run into Roberto again, as she felt he had laughed at her. Rufina was also preparing to leave when the son of the owner stopped her. "Did I imagine it, or have you been avoiding me all day?" he asked. "No," she answered awkwardly. "It's just that yesterday. I thought, well, forget about what happened yesterday. I won't even think about it. Something like that can't be forgotten." Rufina's face turned red once more. Her heart beat so fast and loud that it felt like an invisible drummer was playing a rhythm. Noticing the flustered expression on her face, Roberto stepped closer and asked, "What's wrong? I thought yesterday you were being honest with me." "Yes, but," Rufina fell silent again, searching for the right words. "We can't be together." Finally, gathering her courage, she said it aloud. "Why?" The young man was surprised. "As far as I know, you don't have anyone." "It's not about that. It's just, we're different. You're handsome, educated, wealthy." She listed his virtues. "And I'm just a saleswoman in your mom's shop. I have nothing. What could I offer you? What do we have in common?" "Well, first of all, you're very beautiful, too," Roberto smiled. "Secondly, why would I want an educated competitor in my family? My education is enough for both of us. And you're smart, kind, gentle, thoughtful, honest, sincere. And this list could go on forever. You're real. I've been looking for a girl like you my whole life, but I never even dreamed that I'd meet her in reality. There's no one like you." Warmth spread through Rufina's body at his words. She was happy to hear this from him. All day, she had been afraid to meet his gaze and see mockery or disappointment in his eyes. But now, Rufina felt that Roberto was being sincere with her. At one point, the man embraced her and kissed her lips. His breath burned her. The girl forgot all her fears and doubts. She felt so good in his embrace. She closed her eyes and surrendered to her desire. She had never experienced such pleasure before. "I won't let you go anywhere," Roberto whispered, breaking their kisses occasionally. Finally, he asked, "So, what do you say? Home?" "No," Rufina shook her head. "I have something to do." "What's that?" The young man was surprised. "It's already late. Do you remember the old lady who comes to our store every day?" The girl asked. "It's her birthday today, but she's all alone. Her only friend passed away. I want to visit her, wish her a happy birthday. Do you want me to go with you?" Rufina nodded and smiled. She liked that Roberto accepted her concern for a stranger so calmly and didn't make any harsh comments about it. On their way to Tiara's, they bought her a beautiful down scarf and a large chocolate cake as a gift. While Rufina was picking out balloons in the toy section, Roberto bought a bouquet of flowers. Suddenly, Rufina hesitated before the door. "It feels wrong to visit without an invitation," she murmured. But Roberto had already pressed the doorbell. The sound of shuffling footsteps grew louder, and the next moment, the key scraped in the lock, and the door opened. Tiara looked at the unexpected guests with wide, surprised eyes. "Happy birthday!" Rufina exclaimed, handing the woman the cake. "Happy holiday!" Roberto said, offering the old woman the bouquet. Overcome with emotions, Tiara began to cry. As she accepted the gifts, she spoke. "The last time I received flowers was about 50 years ago. Thank you, my dear. And this cake, it's my favorite. Come in." "I wasn't expecting guests today," she admitted, "but I'm so happy to see you." Rufina helped the hostess pour coffee into cups and cut the cake. Balloons filled with gas hung from the ceiling, creating an illusion of celebration. When everyone was seated at the table, Rufina took the scarf from the bag, draped it over the old woman's shoulders, and said, "We have one more gift for you. I hope you'll like it." Tiara wrapped herself in the scarf and started crying again. These were tears of joy. Her eyes sparkled with happiness and gratitude for the little celebration they had arranged for her. Over coffee, they chatted like old friends. The woman shared stories of her youth, her expression changing as she spoke, sometimes smiling, sometimes sad, lost in memories of events long past. "I wasn't always like this," she said thoughtfully. "As a child, I dreamed of becoming a teacher, like our neighbor. But the war changed my plans. I was 10 when the Germans invaded our country. My father went to the front, and I never saw him again. He's still listed as missing in action. My mother worked at the factory from dawn till dusk until she caught pneumonia. By then, I had already been helping her, so when she fell ill, I went to work for her. She passed away in '45, just a few months before the victory. I was sent to an orphanage. That's how I ended up in this town. After the orphanage, I got a job at the factory. My hands still remembered how to work the sewing machine. They gave me a spot in a dormitory, and I lived there for over 10 years. Why didn't you return to your village?" Rufina interrupted her. There was nowhere to go back to. The village was nothing but a burned-out field. "You said you lived in a dormitory," the girl reminded her. "Did you get this apartment later?" "This is my husband's apartment," Tiara replied. "After the war, men were worth their weight in gold. Everywhere you looked, there were only women. Some were lucky, they waited for their husbands to return from the war. But many received death notices. Widows, left with children, worked around the clock to feed their kids. But even then, everyone lived in poverty. It was considered very lucky to get married, as it was easier to survive and raise children together. But, as I said, there weren't enough men for everyone, so widows and young girls didn't shy away from brief affairs with married men. But what about the judgment of neighbors and acquaintances?" Rufina asked. "I heard that it was very strict." "There have always been gossips," the old woman answered. "They would criticize, punish, gossip. But that didn't stop many. If everyone followed moral rules, the population would have died out. And the war had already taken a huge toll on people. Until I was 30, I kept myself hoping to meet the one. But he never came my way. However, one day I met a professor. He was an amazing person. Where did you meet? Rufina asked curiously. In the park. I used to take walks in the park after work, which was located next to the institute. I liked watching the students running by and imagining myself among them. After all, I never got an education, Tiara explained bitterly. One day, a man around 60 sat next to me on the bench. At the time, he seemed like an old man to me. But as soon as he started talking, I forgot about everything else. He was so fascinating, he knew so much. I could listen to him for hours. Later, I found out he taught history at that very institute. He had a degree and was a professor. We started meeting often and walking in the park. For a long time, our relationship was platonic. He was married. According to him, I reminded him of his daughter, who had died early in the war. I fell in love with him. I thought he was the man of my dreams. One day, he took me to his home, to this very apartment. At that time, he and his wife had just gotten it. A new house, unfamiliar neighbors. His wife went to visit her sister for a week, and he invited me over for coffee. I stayed with him for a whole week. It was the happiest time of my life. The woman smiled at the memory. But his wife came back, heard from well-meaning people about her husband's infidelity, and made a scene. Soon after, she had a heart attack and passed away. That's when I became the second wife of the professor. But they say the truth, you can't build your happiness on someone else's misfortune. We lived together for 10 years. We didn't have any children. The love that had suddenly blossomed in the park disappeared just as suddenly. But by that time, we already shared a common hobby. My professor had always been interested in antiques. His salary allowed him to occasionally add to his collection. I read his books and gradually got involved in this. I liked visiting antique shops, but usually, the items there were expensive. So, I found antiques among ordinary people. Not everyone understood the value of their things and gladly let them go for a symbolic price. At just over 40, I became a widow. No husband, no children, no relatives, but I still had my hobby. This, the woman pointed to the antique kitchen cabinet, is my whole life. Rufina suddenly remembered the time when the old woman had brought an old chair into the house. What about that chair? She asked. Yes. It has its own story. As she saw her guests off, Tiara bid them farewell as if they were the closest of relatives. She kept thanking them for arranging a real celebration for her. An amazing person, Rufina said, admiringly, on the way home. She lives in poverty, but she buys antiques and is as happy as a child with every new piece of history. How is that possible? Collectors are all strange people, Roberto agreed. But there's something to it. And I was starting to worry. Florencia greeted her son and tenant with these words. The store closed long ago, but you're still not home. Or did you decide to repeat your theater trip? No, Roberto replied with a smirk. We didn't appreciate that performance. I visited Tiara, Rufina explained, and your son kindly offered to keep me company. Florencia, who had clearly hoped to hear something else, looked confused, but after hearing Rufina's detailed story about the visit to the regular customer, she came to a conclusion. You're truly an extraordinary girl. Not everyone can care so much for a stranger. You have such a kind soul, Rufina. The guy you choose will be lucky. Roberto and Rufina exchanged a glance, as if to consult each other about whether to inform Florencia of their relationship. I've already made my choice, the girl announced. Mom, I hope you won't mind if Rufina and I. Roberto didn't manage to finish his sentence before the woman broke into a smile and hugged both her son and his girlfriend. Well, finally, she exclaimed. I was beginning to think you'd never make this decision. So you set all this up on purpose? The young man asked. To make us clash? Well, that's a bit much. His mother grinned. I liked Rufina from the start, but I never imagined you'd be together. She really had nowhere to live, so I invited her to stay with me. And then you came back home after a long absence, bringing a fiancé with you. I'm not responsible for you breaking up and you losing your job. I just wanted to help, so I offered you a job with me. But, as time showed, it wasn't for nothing. I'm happy you two are together." Rufina felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders after Florencia's blessing. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't on the same level as Roberto. Every day, she fell deeper in love with him, but a tiny invisible doubt lingered deep in her soul, unsettling her. At work, the young couple didn't openly display their relationship to avoid fueling gossip or envy. But Leticia seemed torn by the desire to find out who her former suitor was seeing. "Do I detect love in the air?" she asked her colleague one day, catching Rufina off guard. "What makes you think that?" Rufina responded with a question of her own. "You used to be a bit naive, but now you're glowing. Soon enough, you'll have a halo above your head. Stop making things up." The girl waved her off. "I'm not making anything up," Leticia persisted. "Before, you just fed your beggar, but now you're buying her expensive gifts. Looks like you've lost your mind." This was her reaction when she found out Rufina had gifted Tiara a down shawl. The old woman wore it every day, never taking it off, and continuously thanked her benefactor for the luxurious gift. Moreover, she often mentioned some gentleman who had accompanied her that day. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Leticia asked one day. "Our Rufina doesn't have any suitor." "What a pity." The old woman replied sincerely. "I really liked him. Such an intelligent man. Just like my professor. He was looking at her all evening, as if he was afraid she'd disappear if he turned away for even a moment. A beautiful couple." While Tiara was sharing her impression of the stranger, Roberto entered the store. Upon seeing him, she exclaimed, "There he is." "And you said," the old woman looked at Leticia reproachfully, "that Rufina doesn't have a suitor. Then what's he doing here? He didn't come for yogurt, did he?" Realizing that Rufina and Roberto had been hiding their relationship from her all this time, Leticia was furious, but quickly regained her composure. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" she asked. "I'm sure," the customer confirmed. "He gave me this bouquet." She proudly spread her arms wide. After they were alone, Leticia asked with a smirk, "Do you really think anything could come of this with Roberto? Who is he, and who are you? If I didn't suit him, you're bound to be left with nothing." Not having heard the conversation between her colleague and Tiara, Rufina blushed. She didn't want to discuss her personal life with anyone, especially not with Leticia. But denying it was pointless, and knowing her colleague's character, remaining silent wouldn't work either. So, gathering her thoughts, she spoke loudly and confidently. "If I were you, I'd be thinking about what's wrong with me. You're already over 30, and still running after men. It doesn't seem like you're suffering from lack of male attention, but no one's asking you to marry them. Maybe it's time to focus on your own life and stop discussing and envying other people's happiness." Leticia was left speechless in surprise. Her colleague's words felt harsh, but at the same time, there was a kernel of truth in them. The girl was so angry and upset that she clenched her fists and gasped for air, like a fish out of water. She fluttered her long, heavily mascaraed eyelashes, but couldn't say a word. The matter was not brought up again. More than a month had passed since Roberto and Rufina started seeing each other. There had been no word from Denisa. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. This pleased her former boyfriend, Roberto. He hoped she would soon forget about him and stop causing trouble. However, he still faced rejection from the companies he had been considering for work. Not long before New Year, Denisa made her presence known. Waiting for Rufina near her house, she asked her for a talk. "I know you're not to blame for my breakup with Roberto," she started. "I've seen his new girl. I'm sure it won't last long with her. Help me get him back. I'll make it worth your while." "I don't think I can be of any help," Rufina replied, realizing that Denisa was referring to her colleague. "Oh, you definitely can. I've got it all figured out, the girl insisted. I found out that she works with you in his mother's store. All you have to do is set her up at the cash register, and she'll get a kick from both the store owner and Roberto. He's such an honest guy. He won't tolerate a thief next to him. That's a terrible idea, Rufina said. I won't do it. I'll pay you well, Denisa promised. And you'll get rid of your competition for the position of manager at the new store. You even know about that? The girl was surprised. I have good informants, Denisa boasted. Rufina remembered the scandal Denisa caused at the theater. She didn't want the same kind of wrath directed at her. But getting involved in the schemes of her fiancé's ex-fiancé was something she wanted even less. So, gathering her strength, she replied, If they were good informants, you wouldn't be standing here with me, trying to convince me to do something underhanded. What do you mean by that? Denisa didn't understand. Leave him alone. Rufina ignored the question. He's made his choice, and it's not you. Don't degrade yourself. Roberto will never be with a woman who doesn't appreciate or respect him. What are you talking about? The rector's daughter was confused. And then it dawned on her. Could it be you who truly appreciated him? So, my intuition wasn't wrong after all? You stole my fiancé from me? Denisa yelled, barely containing her anger. You lost Roberto yourself, Rufina replied. I had nothing to do with your breakup. But I'm glad he realized his mistake and left you. The girl choked with anger. I'll destroy both of you. My dad. A cruel, narrow-minded man, Rufina continued for her, trying to force a man to be with his daughter instead of teaching her proper manners and explaining that you can't win someone's heart by force. Denisa wanted to say something, but she was distracted by the opening gate, from which Florencia appeared. What's all this shouting so early in the morning? She asked, and, seeing the troublemaker, turned to Denisa with irritation. What are you doing here? I thought my son clearly made it known that you are not welcome in this house. Stop stalking him and our family. Or we'll find a way to deal with you too. Without a word, the girl got into her car and drove away. Soon after, the local news reported that several top executives of various organizations had been arrested for abuse of power and corruption. Among them was the rector of the university. The report mentioned that if the charges were proven, he would lose not only his freedom but also his wealth. God sees everything, said Florencia. After that, there was no word from Denisa. A month after the scandal, either by coincidence or after freeing himself from obligations to his friend, the rector, Roberto received a call from the head of the large company he had been dreaming of, offering him a great position. Congratulations, son. Florencia cheered at the news. Rufina was also happy. Things were going great with Roberto, and Florencia promised her the position of manager in the new store on the condition that she go study. Letitia, after their last clash, had bitten her tongue and communicated with Rufina only about work-related matters. The New Year holidays were approaching. The store was filled with customers, buying products so quickly, it seemed like they were stocking up for a whole year. By the end of the shift, the salespeople were exhausted, but there was one consolation: a big profit meant a big paycheck. It's been a while since your beggar has shown up, Letitia remarked disdainfully, counting the money in the cash register on the last day of the old year. Rufina suddenly remembered that, indeed, the last time she had seen Tiara was several days ago. After closing the store, she headed to check on her charge. She rang the bell, but no one answered the first time. Rufina pressed the button again and listened intently, pressing her ear against the door. Finally, after about 15 minutes and persistent knocking, she heard familiar shuffling footsteps from inside. "Who's there?" came a hoarse voice, followed by a cough. "Mrs. Tiara." "It's me, Rufina. Please open the door." The sound of keys jangling, followed by a scraping noise in the lock, reached Rufina's ears, and the head of the housekeeper appeared through the slightly open door. Her messy, unkempt hair, dull eyes, and wrinkled face all indicated something was wrong with the elderly woman. "Mrs. Tiara, are you all right?" the worried visitor asked. "You look unwell. Are you sick?" The woman was overcome by another bout of coughing. "You need to see a doctor," Rufina said, and immediately called for an ambulance. While waiting for the doctor, Tiara lay down, unable to fight off the overpowering sleep. The ambulance arrived and took the patient, diagnosing her with pneumonia. "I'll come to see you tomorrow," Rufina promised the elderly woman. "Get well soon." That evening, Rufina returned home late. Tired from work and distressed over Tiara's illness, she didn't feel like talking to anyone. However, when she entered the living room, she was surprised and delighted to find a festive table set, and sitting with Florencia and Roberto was Eldora. "Mom!" the girl exclaimed, rushing into her embrace. "What are you doing here? How did you get here?" "Roberto invited me to celebrate the new year with everyone," Eldora explained. Happy Rufina gave Roberto a questioning look. "I wanted to surprise you," he admitted. "Where have you been? I called you, but you were unreachable all evening. I even went to the store, but no one was there. I called Leticia, and she said you'd already left." There was a note of concern in Roberto's voice. "Maybe the phone died," Rufina suggested, pulling it out of her bag. "You didn't forget, today's a holiday, did you?" the young man asked. "Moms have already prepared everything. They were just waiting for you." "Sorry." The girl apologized, feeling guilty. "I completely lost track of time." "Are you feeling all right?" Florencia asked, noticing how pale she looked. "You don't look well." "No, I'm just a little tired. I'll freshen up and be right back." Soon, everyone sat down at the table. The first toast was made for the meeting and the introduction of the mothers. As they raised their glasses a second time, everyone recalled the good things the past year had brought. Roberto thanked fate for bringing him together with Rufina. When the chimes of the clock rang in the new year, they all wished each other happiness. "A moment of your attention, please," Roberto said, standing up from the table. "I want the coming year to be happier than the last. In front of our mothers, I'd like to ask you," he turned to Rufina, kneeling before her and offering a ring in a box. "Will you marry me?" The proposal was so unexpected that Rufina froze in surprise. Florencia and Eldora watched their children, holding their breath. It was a surprise for them, too. After looking around at the people present, Rufina nodded in agreement. "Yes," she said, and in a burst of joy, she threw herself into Roberto's arms. The wedding would be held in the summer. "There will be time to prepare," Florencia and Eldora agreed. The entire festive night, the conversation at the table revolved around the upcoming celebration and the newlyweds' future. Only by morning did everyone head to their rooms. Rufina had the next 3 days off, so she decided to get some rest and then visit her charge in the hospital. In the evening, she hurried to Tiara's bedside. However, when she arrived at the visitor's desk, her gifts were not accepted, and she was asked to wait for the doctor. Soon, a woman in a white coat came out, introduced herself to Rufina, and asked, "Who are you to the patient?" "A good acquaintance," Rufina replied. "Does she have any relatives?" "I don't think so." "What happened?" "If you need anything, I'll bring it. Just let me know." "No, there's nothing else needed. Your acquaintance passed away last night," the doctor said. Her words struck Rufina like a bolt from the blue. She couldn't believe that Tiara had left so quickly. Just yesterday, she had spoken with her, and now she was gone. But the girl paused to catch her breath. How could this happen? "I sent her to the hospital. There are doctors here." "We are not all powerful," the woman in the white coat remarked. "Will you be taking her?" "Yes, of course." For the next 2 days, Rufina and Roberto arranged the funeral. "Why do you even bother?" Leticia didn't understand. She was nothing but trouble and inconvenience in life, and now she spoiled your celebration. But I couldn't leave her in the hospital, could I? Rufina replied, genuinely surprised. She had no one else but me. Oh, such a Mother Teresa. Letitia sneered. She had already gotten used to the quirks of her co-worker, but still couldn't remain silent. Rufina, on the other hand, had come to understand Letitia's sharp character and didn't react to her remarks. Having fulfilled her last duty to the deceased, Rufina mourned for a long time. It seemed like just an acquaintance. But over the course of their interactions, Rufina had become attached to Tiara. You will probably cancel the wedding because of her too. Letitia teased. No, Rufina replied calmly. Tiara wouldn't have liked that decision. She liked Roberto. She approved of my choice. Gradually, the pain of loss subsided. The couple continued preparing for their wedding. Rufina was happy. But one thought still troubled her. She still felt unworthy of Roberto. While the education issue was partially resolved, she had applied to a university. The dowry was another matter. There was no fortune to expect. If I needed a rich bride, I would have married Denisa, Roberto reassured her. But I chose you. You're kind, gentle, sensitive, honest. And that's the best dowry for a woman. And above all, I love you. His words comforted Rufina. She eagerly awaited the wedding day. And it finally arrived. From early in the morning, Rufina was busy dressing up and getting ready. Roberto, in keeping with tradition, had gone to his friend's place the day before and was now hurrying to his bride, who was waiting for him at Florencia's house. The doorbell rang. It's him. Rufina exclaimed, rushing to the door. Wait. Her future mother-in-law stopped her. I'll open it. At the doorstep stood a distinguished elderly man. Is Rufina Bravo residing here? He asked. Yes, Florencia replied and called her future daughter-in-law. Can we speak in private? The stranger asked, noticing Rufina in her wedding dress. Rufina was taken aback, but the hostess pointed to the door to her office. You can talk there. Roberto arrived to pick up his bride just as she came out of the office with the unexpected guest. The expression on Rufina's face left him unsure of what was going through her mind. Her eyes reflected a mix of sadness and joy. Upon seeing her fiancé, the girl rushed to him and began to cry. What happened? He asked, startled. Who is this man? After composing herself, Rufina answered. He's the notary. He brought a document in my name. Mrs. Tiara managed to prepare a will, and I'm her sole heir. Roberto turned an astonished gaze toward the man, who confirmed Rufina's words. What a surprise, said the hostess. And to think this had to happen today of all days. Congratulations. Eldora chimed in. Maybe it's a sign from above. In this way, your acquaintance is thanking you for your kindness. Unbelievable. Letitia gasped with envy. Can this really happen? How unfair. Some people get everything and others nothing. The wedding celebration was over. The guests, full and content, went home. The newlyweds were left alone. Rufina felt exhausted after such an eventful day. She walked over to the window and gazed at the star-filled sky. What are you thinking about? Roberto asked. I was thinking about Mrs. Tiara, she answered sadly. Even after her passing, she continues to be a part of my life. Yes, today was a magical day, her husband agreed. And not just because you became my wife. That sweet old lady seemed to bless us from above. Thank you, Rufina whispered, looking up at the stars. The next day, without wasting any time, the couple went to Tiara's apartment. After the owner's funeral, Rufina hadn't been there once. Nothing had changed in the 6 months that had passed, but it seemed to her that everything was different now. The shabby house, the old repairs in the apartment, the worn-out furniture, it all looked different now, lifeless and lonely. Rufina walked through the apartment. Here was the wooden table where she and the owner had once drank coffee and ate cake. And there was the same chair, the one that had brought her to the old lady's house for the first time. And this was the antique wardrobe that Tiara had especially cherished. She hid all her most valuable things in it and never opened the door when strangers were around. Remembering the old lady's quirks, Rufina smiled. It seemed as though Tiara was invisibly present, somewhere nearby. Well, it's not a palace, Roberto assessed the space, but if we renovate and get rid of all this old stuff, we could even live here for a while until we save up for a new apartment. Still overwhelmed by the memories, Rufina nodded thoughtfully, but quickly snapped back to the present. You're right, renovation wouldn't hurt. But I wouldn't rush to get rid of the furniture. Tiara said it was all antique. Roberto smirked. Do you really believe that? Have you ever been to an antique store? No, she admitted. But why would she lie to me? And where did she put all her money, then? That's another question. But just to be sure, let's hire an expert to confirm whether I'm right. After a thorough inspection of the furniture, the antique expert delivered his verdict. These items have no value. You can safely throw them out. Except for this wardrobe, the man carefully examined the piece of furniture from all sides and continued. I can offer you a good price for it. We'll think about it, Rufina replied. See? Roberto said as he saw the specialist off. Your old lady just lost her mind and started collecting trash from the dumpsters. Don't talk about her like that, Rufina asked. Anyway, Tiara was a kind-hearted person with a broad soul. We'll get rid of the junk, renovate, and live here, remembering her kindness every day. With that, the woman opened the wardrobe, and a feathered shawl fell out, the one she had given the owner on her last birthday. Look! She called to her husband. Tiara put everything important to her in this wardrobe. That means she appreciated our gift. Rufina reached into the wardrobe and pulled out a photo album filled with old photographs. In them, the old lady was captured as a young, blooming woman. The photo album contained her entire life. Besides that, there were various items on the shelves that held value only to their owner. The newlyweds began to take the unwanted things out to the trash. Rufina took the chair, the very one she had brought into the apartment long ago, and felt that it had become much heavier than it was back then. Surprised by this, she began to examine it from different angles and discovered a removable bottom under the seat. I found something. She called to her husband and moved the plywood. Suddenly, jewelry spilled out of the chair, earrings, bracelets, necklaces, rings, and more. They all had unique designs, with large, colorful stones in every piece. Pouring the find onto the floor, an astonished Rufina confessed. I've only seen this kind of thing in the movies. Roberto, who had rushed over to the noise, stood there with his mouth open, staring at the pile of jewelry. Later, the newlyweds learned that the treasure was worth a great deal of money. All the jewels hidden in the chair were indeed antiques, just as the old lady had said. But Tiara assured me that it was the furniture that had great value, Rufina remembered. Maybe she was testing you? Roberto suggested. What if you were after her wealth? These questions remained unanswered. Rufina didn't sell all the jewelry, deciding to keep them as a memento of her benefactor and a guarantee for their secure future. However, they took a few pieces to the antique store, and by adding the money from the sale of the apartment, they bought themselves a new home. The photo album, along with the antiques, was kept for the rest of their lives in the very same wardrobe they inherited from the wealthy beggar.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.